Well, I'm going to do a random ass video. Actually, I want to buy my guitar poster first because it seems to be falling off. Fucking hell. What a good start. So anyway, I'm doing this sort of freestyle, unscripted. Just want to talk about how you get to the point in art, music, or whatever arts are. The way you can make something semi-decent, if you could even call it that. Personally, I don't think there's any real metric that you can measure it by. Just objectively speaking, it's all different. Everyone has different abilities as well, so for example, I'd still be impressed if someone who paints with feet can, I don't know, make a landscape. Even if it's like a pencil drawing, like it's impressive anyway. The point is that there's a lot of advice out there that just doesn't work for art. And it's what leads to people giving up, really. But I'm here to sort of refute that. The TLDR basically is inspired and experiment. Basically get inspired and experiment. But here's the long version. When I was young, I didn't really have a good upbringing, but I did have good taste sort of put into me, if it makes sense. And that sort of paved my taste in music and sort of, in a way, digital art. But that was more from friends and being online. Eventually, I came to realise that I was a selfish little shit. I was basically someone who didn't want to do anything for anyone, and that was just not nice. And eventually, I had a crisis. Complete mental health crisis, which basically gave my entire personality a U-turn. Also, when I started becoming an adult, my taste changed as well, and I began to lean towards, like, let's just say, heavier music and cuter artwork. Mainly that. I was into Sonic and stuff. Anyway, with those tastes, I pretty much wanted to explore them. I started by reading fan fictions, and it was okay, but I realised I didn't like many of them because I felt like I could do better. So basically, I wrote fan fictions for a while, developed my style of writing and just themes and stuff, patterns. Eventually, it's just led me on to pretty much writing all the time, and I got so good at writing that I say too much to people. But I'm still not a great writer, and that's mainly because I don't pay attention to it well enough. But I have now, after seeing a lot of TV and movies. Things like Breaking Bad, Dark, Stranger Things, I guess you can add there. And anime like Attack on Titan, Death Note. Basically, I know what you need to do when you're sort of writing. So, with that in mind, I had to pretty much change, because I had to give up what I was writing because of a sort of, I guess, over-attachment. I don't know what you call it. Obsessiveness, that's it. And I realised I needed to stop. So I did. I gave up on my dreams of becoming a Sonic writer and moved to other things, which I was already doing at the time actually, but not as good, I guess. It's gonna be annoying, I'll turn it off. But pretty much I was doing things like making artwork for Sonic, and it was okay. It wasn't great. The problem is I was tracing, which itself isn't too bad if you're starting out, but it isn't ideal. Eventually I began sort of copying, and that sort of worked, but it wasn't perfect again. I was trying to figure out all this time, how the fuck do you get good at this? I was getting really frustrated, and because I didn't have much confidence anyway, I was thinking of giving up. And eventually, I just did really. I just stopped doing artwork altogether for a while and came back on it. I was playing games instead, which can be good. Then I got into music, and I started out by playing guitar with a game called Rocksmith. Eventually, some things happened, and I began to get more passionate about music as well. Because actually, music brought me a similar amount of joy that art did. So I figured it's worth learning more about it. So eventually, I started learning songs by ear. It has its benefits, but it also has its flaws. I shared my tabs with the world pretty much. I was transcribing Dematory, which is a Tohu cover band. It was really interesting. It wasn't fun necessarily, but when you get to learn them note by note, it's really interesting to see how it's composed. And actually, thanks to doing this pretty much for years, I learned how scales worked. And I learned how keys worked as well in music theory. But as you probably know, that isn't all there is to it. Much later on, I decided I'm done with my Rocksmith DDLC journey, also stopped writing, and I began to do artwork again, but not as regularly as I used to. It was mainly that if I get an idea, I make it, and I put a lot of time into it, basically all at once, which actually isn't that good. And this is where I bring in the interesting bit of advice that I learned a few years ago. If you want to get good at something, it isn't about practice, it's about experimentation and inspiration. You need your inspiration to experiment, because I think if you follow your inspiration, you experiment by copying them, you end up finding your own style. I'm not joking about that. Literally find your favourite artist or song and try to copy it. Try to copy their style, and you'll see what you get. And it may not be perfect the first time, but the more you do it, the more you get to their point. And eventually you find your own by accident. So when I was drawing, I was struggling to figure out what style I wanted, how I wanted to appear. Eventually, because of my interest in anime, I began copying another artist. And his artwork was interesting to say. But I liked the style because it actually achieved something unique. And that was good anime boys, pretty much. Because I found it hard to like how people drew male anime characters. There's none that I consider cute, pretty much, and that was like, ugh, why? Just thought it was a bit gross, and eventually I discovered them. And so I began copying, and eventually I got what I've got now. And it's not good to copy exactly, but it's good to learn sort of the style to know that you can change it a bit and make it how you want it, but mine was pretty much by accident. Because I think it can only go three ways. You can either copy it directly, you can make something better, or you discover it by accident. And in terms of music, I did the same thing. I was copying Dematory, and I ended up with a sound that I really liked. It surprised me. I was quite proud of the sound, and I've stuck to it since. And because I'm someone with autism, learning difficulties, and potentially dyspraxia/dysgraphia, I've had to work a lot more than most people, and that's why I bring in the routine thing. I multitask, and except for when I do music, because I actually need to concentrate when I do that, but I used to multitask with that. Multitasking is important if you have ADHD because you get so much done this way. Because it's a rare ability that you have that not many people have actually. It can be really useful. And what I do is when I make art, I watch something on the side. And you could do the same with music, technically speaking. It just depends on what you're doing, but because I'm doing production stuff, I need to concentrate. And you might need to do the same with art. I haven't been able to be honest, because it's just boring doing art on its own. You just need to be careful, really. I think if one outweighs the other, then it's not going to work. Just say it as it is. And as for whether I enjoy making art or TV, fucking seagull distracted me. Music, that's that. It isn't really that fun because the process is kind of tedious. And that's where I think you need to have motivation. That's where I think you need to find a reason to do it, pretty much. And my reason was pretty simple. Looking back on my life, the sort of childhood abuse I had, the lack of kindness I showed, and actually it's just callousness really, until I became an adult. I realised I needed to redeem myself, needed to give back to people, give back to the world. So I began focusing on kindness. I tried to be as kind as possible. And when it comes to making music and stuff and art, I want to try and make results that I like. It doesn't always work out that way, but it can. And the interesting thing is that it takes a while to get to the result anyway. Because within every result, there's a result within that. And every note you place, that's a victory. Every bar you make, every brush stroke, is a victory of some sort. There's no such thing as a bad thing with these things. Just that time isn't on your side, and that's the main thing I don't like. And that's pretty fascinating, really. Because obviously, I wish I had all the time in the world, so I can make the best possible stuff I can. But I don't. Actually, with my recent situation changing, I literally don't have as much time as I used to. And actually, I'm missing out on my routine of doing artwork and music, you name it. But on top of that, I also show kindness outside of it. So I talk to people, I give them advice. Apparently, I'm a really good counsellor. So yeah, you just need to keep experimenting until you find something that resonates with you, something that you can also replicate. That's the other important thing. It's just I've never liked the advice. I'm on the autism spectrum, as I said, and for me it's different because what people try to teach me isn't something I can always learn. And that's been a complicated part of growing up and actually going through a mainstream school, which might surprise people. I was considered too intelligent back then, and I think now I'm considered too intelligent as well. It's funny how that happens. I don't know how, but I don't like the word because it makes other people feel bad, and I don't really want people to feel bad just because I'm, let's just say, more knowledgeable and logical than them. Some people just can't do that. That's fine. That's valid. So I think, yeah, that's all I've got to say, as far as I know. Yeah, the motivation, that's it. So you need to be motivated to do these things. And with artwork and music, the reason I don't sell them is because I want to share my love of it with the world, and that to me is a kindness. And people do apparently like them, which I also find hard to believe. And how I address my self-confidence is looking at it objectively and honestly, because I can't just say everything is bad. I have to understand why it's bad. To me, that refutes anything really. And unfortunately, I can find reasons why it's bad because, again, I'm autistic, I'm observant, I'm overthinking all the time. So I do find things that I don't like. But the way I counter that is I look for the positives first. Even that one, sort of editing the video and I'm looking at the sort of sky image I made, the stock image. I'm quite happy with the colours, I'm happy with the stars. The cloud brushes are just cloud brushes. I like the vibrancy of it all, but that's about it. And apparently in cognitive behavioural therapy, it's called positive coaching. It's basically where you train yourself to recognise positive things. And I've done that before I even went to CBT, so it just shows how my mind works. I discover things without realising what they are. But that's the sort of thing that you can do anyway with the motivation and dedicating your time and resources to that. And unfortunately, I think we have it easier because of our disabilities, which are also technically not disabilities, like I think they're inabilities, so they enable stuff that are far greater than average people, or neurotypical, able-bodied, you name it. You know, they do give us superpowers in some sense. I think that's, again, all I have to say. Hopefully it inspired people or taught you something new. You know, my intent is to make the world a better place, and you can do that through lifestyle changes, like seriously look into things like veganism, animal rights, and look into basically any minority you can think of, even, like, I hate to say it, but paedophiles, minor-attracted persons. They all have a right to life. And just because they have this attraction, which, by the way, they don't choose, doesn't mean they don't have a right to life. They're here with us and they won't change, and you have to accept that and address it as it is. And you have to do the best thing possible for the children, the people who will be affected by it. And that starts at addressing them and that sort of thing. There are many causes that I hold close to my heart, and us schizophrenic people, yeah, they can be difficult to handle, but they're fine people. I've lived with one for a while now, and we get along fine. It's just that moments that he has that can destroy you personally, but at the end of the day, you have to get along with it, because if you don't, it's going to destroy you anyway. And you could just try to counter it as much as possible and accept people with it. And you never know, like, if you refuse to get to know them, you'll never know what they're actually like. You'll never know how nice they could possibly be. You never know how interesting they could be. Just like, you need to experiment again, like, this is what life is about pretty much. You know, do something as long as it doesn't harm anyone else, or exploit anyone else for that matter. I think those are important.